Okay, and welcome back, students who are taking Math for Business and Finance and Math Applications. And we're continuing on with the word problems, the assigned odd number problems that from the digital study guide. And so we're picking up with problem 21-23. Right? Let's see here. Ron bought a bond of B Company for $79.25. The original bond was 5 3/4. Ron wants to know the current yield to the nearest tenth, and please help Ron with a calculation. All right. So remember, with the current yield, when we're talking about yield, we're talking about the dividend um, over the cost of the bond, right? Okay. I didn't memorize the formula. I just think in terms of yield. It's like, what am I getting in return for whatever I paid for? That's what the word yield means to me. So when I'm talking about the current yield, that's how I easily remember, what quote unquote the formula should be. All right. So my total dividend. All right. Let me start out with my dividend. I'm at 5 3/4%, right, which is 5.75 as a percent. Remember, 3/4, divide 4 into 3 gives you 0.75. Again, that's something from back in chapter 2 or 3. All right. And of course, as a percentage, we want to create a decimal out. We'll move the decimal place over 2 to the left. So we end up with 0.0575. So 5 3/4, that's the decimal form. Okay. And since the face value of the bond is 1,000, okay, we multiply by 1,000, and then we move the decimal place 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so we have an annual interest of $57.50. Okay. Now, if that's our interest, right, for our not dividend, we take the interest. That shouldn't be dividend. I was thinking in terms of or interest. Okay. Notice how I'm crossing over to dividend in the stock area with the bond area. Okay, so yeah, technically that shouldn't be dividend, it should be interest. But it all, as I was thinking about the term yield, I'm thinking in terms of what am I getting for what I'm paying out. Okay, so I'm sitting here at 57.50. Okay, and now I have to know how much I'm paying for the price of the bond. Okay, um, and so I have, let me erase some of this. Okay, and I'll erase all of this up in here. So I'm at 57.50 is the interest. Okay, and now for the price of the bond, remember at 79.25, and that's a percentage, so I move the decimal place over 2 places. So I'm at 0.7925, and I multiply that times the $1,000 face value, and that gives me $792.50. You can do all of the math. I took the shortcut. Okay, so I'm going to divide that by 792.50. That's my cost. So 57.50 divided by 792.50 is comes out to 0.0725, and I convert the decimal into a percentage, so 7.255, and I'm rounding to 7.3%, okay, because it's the nearest tenth. Right? So my answer to that is 7.3%. Okay, let's see here. Now, 21-25. Mary Blake is considering whether to buy a stock or a bond. She has a good understanding of the pros and cons of both, The stock she's looking at is trading at 59.25 with an annual dividend of $3.99. Meanwhile, so this is, I'm going to be, anyway. Meanwhile, the bond is trading at 96.25 with an annual interest rate of 11.5%. Calculate for Mary her yield to the nearest 10% for both the stock and the bond. Okay, so in the previous problem there, you saw me working with that bond, and I went like this: dividend over the cost, right? Even though I was talking about interest over the cost. Okay. And I went, oh, okay, that was, this dividend was wrong. It should have been interest because I get interest on the bond. I don't get a dividend on a bond, right? So notice that this here, when we're talking about yield, this is for my stock, and this here is for my bond, okay? Right? This is for my stock, and this is for my bond. Basically the same thing when we're talking about yield, okay? Again, it's your return over your cost. Return, let me do this so I don't get that. Return over my cost. Okay? That's my yield. Okay, and no matter which form you're taking it, well, here's my cost and here's my cost. Well, for stocks they pay dividends, for bonds they pay interest. Okay, so even though I'm not memorizing the formula, and even though I made that slight mistake, I understand the concept, so I'm using the information that I have, and I'm not making the mistakes. Okay, so here we're looking at the stock here first, and it's paying an annual dividend of $3.99, and the price of my stock is $59.25. Well, I divide one by the other. $3.99 divided by $59.25, and that's 0.0673. Converted into a percentage, that's 6.7%. Okay, for the stock. Now for the bond, I have to calculate my interest, right? So I have 11.5% in interest, right? And so that means I'm looking at 11.5 as a percentage, and when I move the decimal over, I end up with a decimal of 0.115. So that's the decimal equivalent of 11.5%. And since the face value of a bond is 1,000, I multiply by 1,000, I end up with 115. Okay. The quick mental shortcut: you can do all of the math like I had done in the previous previous problems, but notice that there's 3 decimal places here, and there's 3 decimal places here. Well, I can just bring down the 115 and move the 3 decimal places over, because I'd be actually moving it over for all of the zeros over here that I would add in. Okay, so that's just a quick mental shortcut that for me, but be careful, because if you end up with 4 decimal places or 5, you have to take that into consideration. Okay, all right, so that's my annual interest is 115. Right, now I have to figure out what my cost is. Right, well, my cost is 96.25. Okay, and again, in a decimal format, I'm going to move it over, so I end up with 0.9625, and I'm multiplying that by 1,000, okay, which gives me 962.50. See what I mean? Here's the shortcut. Here's 3 places, but this is 4 places, right? So I'm moving it down, and I only have to account for 3, because remember, 1, 2, 3 here brings my decimal over here. That's how I ended up with just $962.50. I didn't have to be doing all of the math. I just intuitively knew where I'm moving the decimal. If I have 4 decimals here, well, that means I'm going to end up picking up 1, because I'd have these 3 zeros over here. All right. So anyway, that's the shortcut. And so now we have a cost of $962.50, right? And my interest is 115. So if I take the 115 and I divide it by 962.50, I end up with 0.11948 converted into a percentage, so it's 11.9%. Okay, so my yield on my stock is 6.7%, and the yield on my bond is 11.9%. Right. Okay. With that, I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to pick up with the next problem in the next video. And go back and watch this if you have to. Relatively straightforward. I know I'm sloppy and I end up everywhere, but I hope you follow it along and you're seeing my thought process. Okay?